Very good afternoon to you, sir. Pleasure that you can join us. Welcome to India. You come here at a key point where we're looking at a number of tools such as arbitration in our exercise, in India's exercise to invite investment. And that is, in fact, the first question that I had in mind. That when India is at a stage that it is looking for a path of high growth, when it's looking at foreign investment, how critical in that picture does arbitration become as a means of alternate dispute resolution?
Extremely important. What is arbitration? It's a way of resolving disputes. When you have investments, and India is getting about, last year, $50 billion of investments, and that is likely to grow. Internal investment is likely to grow. External investment flow into India is likely to grow. That is essential for businesses to grow, for the economy. But what that also means is people will look for ways, the mechanisms, the framework for resolving disputes. And going to court is one way, arbitration is another. There are one or two other methods. And therefore, providing an effective, accessible way of resolving disputes is extremely important for businesses.
It's extremely important. One couldn't agree more with that. And the question, however, that we see often in India is that whenever there are bigger parties that make big ticket investments in the country, the question that arises is over the choice of the destination of arbitration, which more often than not happens to be Singapore. What benefit is it that Singapore extends to these parties? Is it an element of perhaps neutrality that Singapore becomes the destination of choice?
I think you've got to look at it in context. India is a large economy, a shade under $3 trillion. A lot of the disputes between the investor and investee, between the parties, is handled within India. It's likely to continue to be handled within India. Whether you talk about courts, whether you talk about arbitration, because India is the market, India is the place where the investment takes place. But in a relatively smaller number of cases, the investing party and the counterparty, which could be Indian or could be another party in India, will agree that the arbitration should be held outside of India. So it's not so much Singapore, but the main issue would be, we need to do it outside of India. And traditionally, it had been London, other places. In the last several years, Singapore has almost become a default choice for that smaller number of cases. That's how I will put it. And you're right, Singapore, first of all, from an Indian party's perspective, they have great confidence in Singapore. It's stable, the rule of law is strong, and culturally, the Indian party understands Singapore, but Singapore offers, in a way, both the East and the West. Americans, Europeans, East Asians, everybody understands Singapore and feel comfortable in Singapore. So it provides that mix, it gives an assurance, and it's not too far from India. So for a variety of reasons, Singapore is now often chosen by Indian parties, if I may say so, when they are not able to do it within India.
Arbitration here locally in India is in its nascent stages, but there's a very, very strong push coming in for the government. In fact, the government has also come out with a new statute to promote arbitration here in India. Given that Singapore is a regional hub here, it is getting a lot of traction from over London. This is a destination that a lot of parties choose to head to. What are the lessons then that India can hope to imbibe, that India can hope to learn as it builds its own ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that you would say arbitration in India is at a nascent stage. There are many experienced arbitrators, lawyers who do a lot of arbitration, and a lot of arbitration does take place within India. We have been approached by arbitration centers in India to work together. And our approach is, there are no secrets in this. It's a win-win situation. And, whatever we do, our framework, we are prepared and happy to share. At the same time, I'm not sure the lessons are that many, as in if you can talk about lessons, because, as I said, India is a large economy. It has internal huge potential for arbitration. Our approach, what Singapore stands for is Singapore's internal economy is small. It's a venue for international arbitration. For people who may have no connection to Singapore to come to Singapore to arbitrate. In that sense, our value proposition is slightly different from the arbitration centers in India, which I think probably are inundated with their own cases, with a huge economy that is growing.
Fair enough, sir. Let's shift focus now into some of the other regional issues that we are seeing that impact both Singapore and India. First, beginning with Hong Kong. We've seen for a slightly over 4 months now, to varying degrees, unrest in Hong Kong. What bearing does that have on the regional economy, on countries like Singapore, on countries like India, on the region? What is the impact of such unrest?
I have spoken at some length on this a few weeks ago, and on the situation in Hong Kong. But specific to your question, my point will be generally, the international environment with the trade issues that we see, the slowing international economy, these already are casting some pall on business sentiments. In addition, if you have an area of instability, what's happening in Hong Kong is causing some instability. It's not good for any of us. So from a business point of view, from the perspective of a growing Asia, it's better for us if Hong Kong is stable and the East Asian region is stable.
Allow me to also ask a follow-up question. You hinted at how perhaps trade relations between two major countries, in this case China and the US, is not at its best. There is some degree of hostility between the two. How does one look at it? How does one look at the unrest in Hong Kong? Is it a cause of concern, or is it perhaps an opportunity for the region, for other countries in the region?
I think if you break up that question, US-China trade tensions is not good news for any of us. Many of us have very substantial trading relationships with both countries, China and the US. If everyone is trading in a globalized, linked-up world, I think all of us benefit. Small countries like Singapore, which are dependent on the international global environment, trade environment, obviously would want stability there. So that's one point. Second point, does the uncertainty or tension in Hong Kong create opportunities? My own view is you've got to take a medium to longer term view on these things, and uncertainty and instability is not good news for any of us. Short term, some money flows can be there here and there, but I don't think that you would look at those and say we welcome those opportunities.
Fair enough, sir. And on to my last question, and this has to do about the diverse nature of a country such as Singapore. That's diversity is shared here in India as well. The question that I wanted to ask in context of this diversity is that globally we are seeing that there is a rise in certain degree of religious intolerance. How relevant in this context does the message of harmony, of rights of minority and tolerance becomes that message? How relevant does that become in today's context?
You're talking about India and Singapore in the same breath. I think in terms of complexity, one can't even begin to comprehend the complexity in India. It's a much more complex mosaic. Singapore is child's play almost by comparison. Which is not to say we take it lightly. It's a very serious issue, but I'll come to it in a minute. India, if you look back, the thousands of years of history, has a history of being syncretic. The people are appreciative of each other's religion, living side by side, coexisting. Of course, it's not always been a happy romantic picture. There have been difficulties. There have been tensions which has led to bloodshed and loss of life periodically. But overall, India has managed to sort of live with all its different religions, all its different races, in a civilized way. So it's not. I'm not sure that we have any lessons to offer, but from a small place, which is much less complex, early in our history, as in modern history of independence, we identified, or Mr. Lee Kuan Yew identified, race relations, religious interactions as, key fault lines. The different religions, the different races can be key fault lines, are key fault lines, and unless you handle them properly, the country will be in serious trouble. And that our value proposition to the world is to be a successful, stable place for business. That value proposition will go if we have racial riots, religious riots, tensions. So we have a very strict legal framework that precludes people from attacking each other on the basis of race or religion, saying nasty things about each other. That's the fundamental legal framework. And the Ministry of Home Affairs, focuses a lot on this, my ministry. But that tells you what you cannot do. There is a constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion. You are entitled to go out there. You are entitled to go out there and pray, do what you like, propagate your own religion, but you don't have to say nasty things about somebody else. Number one. Number two, within the framework of freedom of religion, we encourage people to come together. They pray in the context of their own religion, but we have a number of social policies that cause people to live together and work together. For example, in our housing estates, public housing is more than 80%. We have what's called the ethnic integration policy. People of the different races, we make sure that there's a certain minimum percentage there of every race, major races. Schools are integrated. National service, which all males do at the age of 18, 19, it integrates. Workplaces are integrated, not by fiat, but by the framework of the whole society. And we do a lot to bring people together. And we started with tolerance, and we are hoping to move to celebration, and at the same time not downplay our individual identities, because we all come from great substantial cultural traditions. So there is a lot of strength. So you don't hide. In fact, you celebrate your individual racial and religious identity, but supervening over that is a Singaporean identity that as a young nation we have tried to grow. So the experience, is very different. We have 50 odd years since independence. It's very different from India's thousands of years. But we have struck our own path, which is suitable for us as a small city-state.
Fair enough, sir. Thank you so much for your time and your perspective, and we wish you all the best on your trip here in India. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.